Diagramming sentences is a great way for kinesthetic learners to learn about grammar with a hands-on approach. It's also perfect for visual learners or those who learn by seeing patterns, charts, graphs, and diagrams. From a pedagogical or andragogical standpoint, sentence diagrams are one of the most thorough and concrete methods for assessing very specific grammatical knowledge. For students and teachers both, this means more personalized diagnostic testing and more meaningful lesson planning. In addition to helping isolate specific points of grammar and sentence construction, the basic repetitive principles of diagramming can be applied to any sentence as a way to help unravel the meaning of that sentence. This then leads to better and more thorough reading comprehension skills. It follows that if a person practices analyzing the sentences that other people write or say, and that person gets good at understanding what makes a sentence make good sense, then the sentences the diagrammer writes or says will start making more sense too. In other words, diagramming makes writers better writers and critical thinkers. More importantly, it's a process that slows writing down and makes writers truly think about language. As there is no one-to-one correlation between any thought and any set of words used to express that thought, we cannot truthfully define a sentence as a complete thought. We can, however, define a sentence as a close representation of a complete thought. The closer to our thoughts we can make our sentences, the more effectively we communicate. More pragmatically, we can define a sentence as a group of words, properly punctuated, that contains a subject and a verb and makes a complete thought, not necessarily a one-to-one correlation to our exact complete thought. There are several bits and pieces of language we use to express our thoughts each and every day. Some of those bits and pieces are parts of speech, and others are parts of a sentence. There are 8 parts of speech: nouns, pronouns, adjectives, including articles, adverbs, verbs, conjunctions, prepositions, and interjections. There are 5 parts of a sentence: subjects, predicates, clauses, phrases, and modifiers. With a basic knowledge of just those 13 bits and pieces, we can begin diagramming sentences. Hello, thank you for joining me for the Sentence Diagramming Simple Subjects and Verbs lesson. I am Professor Amy Lynn Hess, and I teach sentence diagramming to my students in my developmental English courses so they can learn a hands-on practical way to help them with their grammar and their sentence constructions. As a reminder, if you didn't watch the introduction, or if it's been a few days since you watched the introduction, this reminder is that there are speech parts as well as sentence parts, and understanding the difference between those will help you diagram more effectively. The speech parts, the parts of speech, are nouns, pronouns, adjectives including articles, adverbs, verbs, conjunctions, prepositions, and interjections. And the parts of a sentence are subjects, predicates, clauses, phrases, and modifiers. Now today's parts are nouns, pronouns, and verbs, and the parts of a sentence that we're going to be covering today are subjects and predicates. What is a subject? Well, a subject is one of the 2 required parts of a sentence. In order to have a complete sentence, you must have both a subject and a predicate. A subject is a noun or a pronoun, or a word that acts like a noun or a pronoun, and we will get to that when we come to the verbals section of diagramming. A subject is the who or the what that does something or is something in the sentence. It is a person, place, thing, or idea, or a word that stands in for a person, a place, a thing, or an idea. So some examples of subjects. I love boats, they float. These are both pronouns that are underlined, and we can ask who loves, and the answer is I, therefore I is the subject. And we can ask what floats, and we can answer they float, so they is the subject. In the same way, we can say sailors sail, who sails? Sailors do. Waves lap, what laps? Waves do. What blows? Wind blows. So wind is the subject there. Now, as far as a predicate, the predicate is the part of the sentence that tells us something about the subject. The verb is the required part of the sentence that appears in the predicate. Okay, so a sentence has a subject and a predicate. The subject is going to be a noun or a pronoun, or a word that acts like a noun or a pronoun, and the predicate has to have a verb within it. Okay, and the verb or a verb phrase represents an action or a state of being. A verb is the something the subject is or something the subject is doing. There are many verb tenses, and some will be 2, 3, or even 4 words long. Okay, so in the sentence, the farmer milks the cow. Farmer is the subject. It's the person who is doing something, and milking the cow is what the farmer is doing. So milks is the verb. Some more examples of verbs. Boats float, and we can say boats do what? They float. Float is the verb. Sailors sailed. They did what? Sailed. Waves will be lapping. What will waves do? Well, they will be lapping. And the wind had blown. The wind did what? The wind had blown. Had blown being the verb. Now, if this is review to you, this should make perfect sense. If this is new to you, I do recommend that you look up some of these grammatical elements that may be confusing to you online to get more information, because we do need to focus on the diagramming of subjects and verbs and the diagramming of these pieces. I don't want to overwhelm students with grammatical information that is most likely review if they're learning how to diagram. Okay, so let's move on to the diagramming of subjects and verbs. When we simply state a subject and a verb, even if it's part of a larger sentence, we can call those kernel sentences. So boats float would be a kernel sentence, and we would diagram it by first drawing a baseline. All sentence diagrams start with a baseline. Then we draw a predicate line or an SV divider line, where we're going to divide the subject from the verb or the subject from the predicate. Then we can fill in what our subject is, and we can fill in what our verb is. So for the sentence boats float, we would put boats on the left side of the divider line and float on the right side of the divider line on top of the baseline. It's that simple. For another example, in an imperative sentence or a sentence where you personally are being told what to do, we call that understood you. That is a type of pronoun, so it does stand in as a subject. So if somebody shouted to you, swim, right? You would be the understood you, would be the subject of the sentence. And so in order to delegate that you as the understood you, so that anybody looking at your diagram would know that the word you doesn't literally appear in the sentence, you place that word you in parentheses, okay? So you in parentheses stands for the understood you of an imperative sentence. And swim is the verb. So you would draw your baseline, then you would draw your divider line, then you would put in the understood you within parentheses on the left side of the divider line to stand in as the subject, and you would put the word swim with a capital letter because it's the first word of the sentence you're diagramming on the right side of the divider line. Okay, and now I have some live action for you. I will diagram the sentences birds chirp and dancers dance. So in birds chirp, birds is the subject, chirp is the verb, and in the sentence dancers dance, dancers is the subject, and dance is the verb. Okay, so it's quite simple. One baseline and one divider line per sentence. All right, so why don't you have a try diagramming a few sentences. You can pause the video and try these sentences that I have here, these 5. And when you're ready to continue, I will show you the answers in diagram form, okay? So go ahead and click pause and only continue when you're ready to see the answers to these sentences. All right, sailors sail. I have sailors on the left side, sail on the right side of the divider line. Sailors is the subject, sail is the verb. Waves lap. Waves is the subject. Lap is the verb. Wind will blow. Wind is the subject. Will blow is the verb in the future tense. Remember that sentences can have verbs and verb phrases, and a verb phrase can have more than one word within it. So wind will blow is the correct way to diagram the sentence. With I did plant is the past tense, and in I have gardened is the present perfect tense. All right? So I hope you did well on those, diagramming simple subjects and verbs. If you're still having some trouble, make sure you review additional information about subjects and verbs, including verb tenses. Remember to always draw your subject-verb divider line or the subject-predicate divider line. Every sentence must have a subject and a verb, even if it is the understood you. Decide who is completing the action to find the subject, and ask what the subject is doing to find the verb. Okay, so can you answer what is the subject? Can you answer what is a predicate? Can you answer how do I diagram a subject and a verb? Do you understand that diagramming subjects and verbs can really help you with your grammar? And were you able to diagram subjects and verbs? If you can answer those questions, and if you can diagram simple subjects and simple verbs within kernel sentences, then please feel free to move on to the next lesson. If not, please feel free to ask a question in the question area or send me a message. But remember that we are focusing on the sentence diagramming, not so much on the grammar. There are many, many resources to help you learn grammar. This is specifically to help you diagram what you already know. Okay? Have an excellent rest of your lessons, and hope to see you back for the next one. Thank you. Welcome to your lesson on sentence diagramming compound subjects and compound verbs. Just as with last time, I explained what the parts of the sentence would be that we would be studying for compound subjects and compound verbs. The parts of a sentence do not change for this lesson. We will still be studying subjects and predicates, and the parts of speech that we'll be studying this time are nouns, pronouns, verbs, and this time we're going to add conjunctions. All right, to remind you about subjects, a subject is one of the two required parts of a sentence. It's either a noun or a pronoun, or a word that acts like a noun or a pronoun. It is the who or what that is doing something or is something in the sentence. So for some examples, boats float, boats is the subject, sailors sail, sailors is the subject, waves lap, waves is the subject, and wind blows, wind is the subject. As for a reminder about verbs, which are the required part of a predicate of a sentence, it is the part of the sentence that tells us something about the subject. A verb or a verb phrase represents an action or a state of being. A verb is the something the subject is or is doing, and there may be more than one word in your verb phrase because there are many verb tenses. Some of them can even be up to 4 words long. So for example, boats float, float is the verb, sailors sailed, sailed is the verb, waves will be lapping is the verb phrase, and had blown is the verb phrase in wind had blown. So when you're diagramming subjects and verbs, remember that simple subjects and verbs can be diagrammed quite easily. You start by drawing your baseline. You then write your subject of your sentence on the baseline. You draw your predicate line to divide your subject from your verb, and then you write your verb on the baseline as well. And in that way, you diagram your kernel sentence or your simple sentence. And that is very easy. But there is more. Sometimes more than one person is doing the same thing as another person. For example, Joyce and Mary could both go for a walk, and the sentence could be Joyce and Mary walk. As for a compound verb, sometimes more than one person or one person can be doing more than one thing at the same time. For example, Joyce walks and sings. Joyce and Mary could walk and sing. More than one person could be doing more than one thing at one time. Now, when we create compound subjects and compound verbs, we are using coordinating conjunctions to join the two words together. The compound subjects and compound verbs are joined by the coordinating conjunctions, and these are all of them. These are all of them you will ever see: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Okay? Those are the coordinating conjunctions: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So when we diagram compound subjects and compound verbs, it's quite as simple as diagramming simple subjects and verbs. So in the example sentence, boats and buoys will float, you still begin with a baseline, you still have a predicate line, you still fill in your subject and your verb, but this time, because there are two subjects, you need to divide the baseline to represent two subjects at once with the coordinating conjunction and connecting the two split baselines. When you diagram a sentence that has a compound verb, you start with your baseline, you still draw your predicate line, you still fill in your subject, but this time you have to split your baseline into two in order to represent both verbs, and again, they are combined by the coordinating conjunction and that sits between the two horizontal lines in a dotted fashion with the word and written up and down. Okay, so buoys will float and bob. If you have both at the same time, both a compound subject and a compound verb, you split the baseline into four, bringing it together at the predicate line. You join your compound subjects and verbs with your coordinating conjunction, but you still have baselines, you still have a predicate line, you still represent every word in the sentence with the first word of the sentence being capitalized. So remember, there are 7 coordinating conjunctions: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. They link subjects together, and they can link verbs together, or they can link clauses together. You can diagram coordinating conjunctions on dashed lines that join the two split baselines: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Okay? So if you think you got it, go ahead and have a try. You can pause and try diagramming the following sentences on your own, and the answers will follow. Remember that only nouns and pronouns can be subjects. Compound subjects and verbs can be linked by coordinating conjunctions, and your verbs can actually be up to 4 words long. That would be a verb phrase. Okay, so when you are ready to see the answers, go ahead and continue. The first one, hope and wait, includes the understood you as the subject. Hope is the first word of the sentence, so it's capitalized. Wait is the second part of the compound verb, and they are joined by the word and on a dashed line. Hope and wait. Bob and I wait. Bob and I is a compound subject. Don't forget to add your subject-verb divider line. Wait is the verb. Bob and I are waiting and hoping. Bob and I is the compound subject. Are waiting and hoping is the compound verb. Are waiting is the present continuous tense, so it does have more than one word. Sandy and Dave will be planting and gardening. Sandy and Dave is a compound subject. Will be planting and gardening is the compound verb. Will be planting, all 3 of those words are part of the future continuous tense. She and Grandma will have been sailing. She and Grandma is the compound subject. Then I have my divider line before the verb will have been sailing, which is the future perfect continuous tense. All 4 of those words are part of the verb phrase. So how'd you do? If you're still having trouble, review additional information about conjunctions, subjects, and verbs, including verb tenses. Remember to draw your subject-verb divider line. Every sentence has to have a subject and a verb. Decide who is completing the action to find the subject. Ask what the subject is doing to find the verb. If you can answer what is a compound subject, what is a compound verb, what is a coordinating conjunction, how do I diagram compound subjects and verbs, will diagramming compound subjects and verbs really help me with my grammar? And if you can diagram compound subjects and verbs, you are ready to move on to the next lesson. Congratulations! Hello, welcome to your next lesson in diagramming sentences. In this lesson, we'll be learning how to diagram modifiers. But before we can start diagramming modifiers, we should talk about the new parts of speech and the new parts of a sentence that we'll be covering in this lesson. The parts of speech that we'll be covering are adjectives, including articles, adverbs, possessive and demonstrative pronouns, and possessive nouns. The part of a sentence that is new to us is the modifier. A modifier is a word or group of words used to add to the meaning of a sentence. Specifically, modifiers can be adjectives, adverbs, possessive nouns or pronouns, or demonstrative pronouns. An adjective is a word that modifies a noun or a pronoun, and they answer what kind, which, how many, or whose. Adverbs modify verbs, adjectives, or another adverb, and they answer how much, when, or where. A possessive noun or pronoun is a word that shows ownership. So if something belonged to me, I would call it my book. My would be a possessive pronoun. If it belonged to somebody named Sue, I would call it Sue's book with an apostrophe S. A demonstrative pronoun is this, that, these, or those, where you're indicating the thing or the items in question. So for example, we can start with one noun, dog. We can add to that by calling it a big dog. We could add to it again by calling it a big gray dog. We could add to it one more time by adding the article, the big gray dog. Then the dog needs to do something in order to form a sentence. So let's have the dog bark. The big gray dog barked. Then we can actually modify how the dog barked by adding loudly and fiercely. So in the end, we can have the big gray dog barked loudly and fiercely. The big gray describes the dog. Loudly and fiercely describes barked. And is the conjunction, which we covered last time when we talked about compound subjects and compound verbs. In diagram form, this sentence would look like this. The big gray dog barked loudly and fiercely, where the modifiers are placed on an angle 45 degrees underneath the word that they modify. Dog is the subject, it's on the left side. Barked is the verb, it's on the right side or the predicate side. The, big, gray all describe dog. Loudly and fiercely describe how the dog barked. Let's go through it one piece at a time. You still start with a baseline. You then add your predicate line. Fill in your subject. Fill in your verb. And notice that you have a conjunction in the sentence, which means you have a compound adverb. Some students like to think of this compound construction like a house or like a rocket ship. We've seen it before, for example, when you took a look at how it looked for a compound subject or a compound verb. But in this instance, it's simply the compound adverb. Then we have the adjectives and adverbs on a 45-degree angle under the words they modify, the compound adverb being in the house or rocket ship formation. The word the is an article that describes dog. Big describes dog. Gray describes dog. Loudly describes how the dog barked. Fiercely also describes how the dog barked. So in the end, we come up with the diagram, the big gray dog barked loudly and fiercely. So why don't you have a try? You can pause the video to try these sentences on your own. The answers will follow. As for a hint, remember that only nouns and pronouns can be subjects. Verbs can be up to 4 words long. Compound subjects, verbs, and modifiers can be linked by coordinating conjunctions in the same pattern that you used for compound subjects and compound verbs. Okay? So go ahead and pause the video and then take a look at the answers. Sue's little dog walks carefully. Dog is the subject, walks is the verb. Sue's and little both describe the dog. Carefully describes how the dog walks. Dog is the subject in dog leaps playfully. Leaps is the verb. The describes dog. Playfully describes how the dog leaps. Big dogs eat quickly. Dogs is the subject. Eat is the verb. Big describes the dogs. Quickly describes how the dogs eat. Small dogs bark often. Small describes dogs, dogs being the subject. Bark is the verb. Often describes how the dogs bark. Roger's dog plays roughly. Rogers is the possessive noun describing dog. Roughly describes how the dog plays. Dogs is the subject in their guard dogs will bite. Will bite is the verb. Their and guard both describe the dogs. The Labradors are eating. Labradors is the subject. Are eating is the verb. The describes the Labradors. Their long tails are wagging very happily. Tails is the subject. Are wagging is the verb. Their and long both describe tails. Now we have something special happening with the adverbs. Happily describes how the dogs are wagging. Very describes to the extent that the dogs are happily wagging. So very is actually an adverb describing another adverb. So we have a horizontal construction and then another diagonal construction where the secondary adverb sits. 4 dogs are swimming and fetching. 4 describes how many dogs, dogs is the subject, are swimming and fetching is the compound verb. Soon the cats will be purring. Cats is the subject, will be purring is the verb, the describes cats, and soon is the adverb that describes when the cats will be purring. So how did you do? If you're still having trouble, review additional information about adjectives, adverbs, possessive pronouns, and possessive nouns. Remember to draw your subject-verb divider line. Every sentence has a subject and a verb. Add modifiers under the words that they directly modify. Ask what the modifier is modifying before you try to diagram the word. So, if you can answer what is an adjective, what is an adverb, how do I form a possessive noun or pronoun, how do I diagram a modifier, can I diagram more than one modifier per sentence, and will diagramming modifiers really help me with my grammar? And if you can diagram modifiers, then it's time for you to move on to the next lesson. So thank you for paying close attention. I hope diagramming modifiers made complete sense to you. However, if it did not, please remember that you're always welcome to post a question in the questions area or send me a message. Okay, until next time, thank you. Enjoy your lessons. Welcome to the sentence diagramming lesson for diagramming direct objects and indirect objects. Before we get started, this is the halfway point, so let's take a look at the review information for speech parts of speech, and sentence parts. The parts of speech are nouns, pronouns, adjectives including articles, adverbs, verbs, conjunctions, prepositions, and interjections. So far we've talked about nouns, pronouns, adjectives and articles, adverbs, verbs, and conjunctions. The parts of a sentence are subjects, predicates, clauses, phrases, and modifiers. We've worked with subjects and predicates. We've worked with modifiers. Today we're going to be looking more closely at the predicate part of a sentence when we take a look at how direct objects and indirect objects work in a sentence. A new part of speech is the transitive type verb. A transitive verb is a type of verb that requires a direct object. What is a direct object? Well, the direct object receives the action of the verb. Transitive verbs require direct objects in order to form a complete sentence. Now that is the dictionary definition of what a direct object is. It really is a pronoun or a noun or a word that acts like a noun, and it answers what or who after the verb. So in the example sentence, she ate beans, we would say she ate being the verb, she ate, and then we could ask what, she ate what, and the answer is beans. It's what she ate. That's the direct object. So for more examples, Charlene made cakes. What did she make? She made cakes. Doug races cars. What does he race? Cars. Natalie loves Ned. Who does she love? She loves Ned. An indirect object does not directly receive the action of the verb like the direct object does. An indirect object, however, is a pronoun or a noun, and it answers the to whom or for whom after the verb plus the direct object, which means if you don't have a direct object, you will not have an indirect object in the sentence. I'll show you how that works. Sally gave Sue gifts. If we're looking for the direct object, we would ask, Sally gave what? And the answer is gifts. Then if we want to find the indirect object, we could ask, Sally gave gifts to whom? And the answer is Sue. Okay, so Sue is the indirect object. Let's take a look at some more examples. Dad gave Mom hugs. He gave hugs to whom? To Mom. Dave tossed me markers. Dave tossed markers to whom? To me. Gerald sent congressman letters. He sent letters to whom? To congressmen. Diagramming direct objects is not terribly difficult. It starts the same way as any other sentence. You draw your baseline, you fill in your subject and your verb, and you make sure that you draw your predicate line or your subject-verb divider line. And then to find the direct object, you ask your subject-verb question, Doug races what? Cars. So you can add your direct object right to the baseline. And make sure you add your direct object line. Now take a look and notice that the subject-verb divider line crosses the baseline, but the direct object line does not, and that's how we delineate between the two. To diagram an indirect object, remember you're only going to have an indirect object if your sentence has a direct object. You still draw your baseline first, fill in your subject, your predicate line, your verb, your direct object, and then you ask your question to whom to get your answer for the indirect object. Draw your indirect object line. Notice it's just a neat and tidy elbow joint underneath the verb of the sentence. You answer your question and fill in your indirect object. In this instance, it's Mom. Dad gave Mom hugs. And your finished diagram looks like this. Okay, so when you're diagramming direct and indirect objects, some things to keep in mind is that your subject always appears to the far left on the baseline. The verb is always in the center. Your direct object always ends the sentence on the baseline. Your indirect object always falls under the baseline, under the verb. Now sometimes you can have compound objects, just like you had compound subjects, compound verbs, or compound modifiers. And the symbols that I gave you to help you remember those compound pieces were the house and the rocket ship, right? So here is a reminder sentence that shows you your compound subject and compound verb with your house or your rocket ship. And in the same way, you can have a compound object, either a direct object or an indirect object. And the finished diagram would look like this. Dad gave Parker and Dean cookies and a brownie, where Parker and Dean is the compound indirect object, cookies and a brownie is the compound direct object. Okay, so why don't you give it a try? Give these 10 sentences a try. Remember that not all sentences have direct objects. Sentences that have direct objects might have indirect objects. And don't let the adverbs and adjectives confuse you. You still place your adjectives and adverbs, including articles or possessives, on a diagonal line under the word they modify, whether that's an object or a subject or a verb. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video and continue when you're ready to see the answers. Sheep slowly eat green grass. Sheep is the subject, eat is the verb, grass is the direct object, green describes grass, and slowly describes how they eat. The farmers tend their sheep. Farmers is the subject, tend is the verb, sheep is the direct object, their describes sheep, and the describes the farmers. Farmers give sheep fresh oats and hay. Farmers is the subject, give is the verb, sheep is the indirect object, oats and hay is the compound direct object, fresh describes oats. Sheep leap fences. Sheep is the subject, leap is the verb, fences is the direct object. Sheep and farmers sleep soundly. Sheep and farmers is the compound subject, sleep is the verb, soundly describes how they sleep. A lamb is also sleeping. Lamb is the subject, is sleeping is the verb, a is the article that describes lamb and also describes is sleeping. Farmer Ned gave Natalie raw wool. Farmer Ned is a person's complete name, so Farmer Ned is the subject, gave is the verb, wool is the direct object, raw describes the type of wool, and Natalie is the indirect object. Natalie thanked Ned. Natalie gave Ned thanks. Natalie is the subject for both of these examples, but in the first example, thanked is the past tense verb, and Ned is the direct object. In the second example, Natalie is the subject, gave is the verb, thanks is the direct object, and Ned is the indirect object. Natalie and Ned pet some bald sheep and lambs. Natalie and Ned is the compound subject, pet is the verb, sheep and lambs is the compound direct object, some and bald both describe sheep. So how did you do? If you're still having some trouble, review additional information about conjunctions, direct objects, indirect objects, and transitive verbs. Remember to draw your subject-verb divider line across the baseline. Every sentence has a subject and a verb. Remember to draw your direct object line to the baseline. Not every sentence has a direct object or indirect object. Ask who or what to find the direct object. Ask to whom or for whom to find the indirect object. So for review, if you can answer what is an indirect object, what is a direct object, how do I diagram direct and indirect objects, and if you have an idea about how diagramming can help you with your grammar, or you can diagram direct and indirect objects with no mistakes, then you are ready to move on to prepositional phrases. Okay, so thank you so much for your kind attention. I hope you enjoyed learning how to diagram direct objects and indirect objects. I will see you next time. Welcome to your lesson on diagramming questions, otherwise known as interrogative sentences. There are 4 sentence types. Each type of sentence does a slightly different job. Declarative sentences make statements. Imperative sentences make demands or requests. Exclamatory sentences make important or excited statements. And interrogative sentences ask questions. We are going to be covering interrogative sentences, otherwise known as questions. Here are some examples of interrogative sentences. Is it raining outside? Should I wear a coat? When do you eat? Did your grandmother call? She is singing? When you diagram a question, you first need to turn the question into an answer to the question that uses all of the exact same words that are in the original interrogative sentence. So when you turn "Does Doug race cars" into a statement, the statement is Doug does race cars. And we diagram it as we would any other sentence. We draw the baseline, fill in the subject, draw the predicate line, and add the verb. In this instance, Doug is the subject, does race is the verb, the complete verb. Then we have to add the direct object and the direct object line because this sentence does have one, and in this instance, it is cars. In our next example, we will look at "You are singing tomorrow" versus "Are you singing tomorrow?" The interrogative form is "Are you singing tomorrow?" The answer, in a positive way, would be "You are singing tomorrow." It utilizes all of the same words. The final diagram would look like this. You is the subject, are singing is the verb, tomorrow answers when, therefore it is an adverb that gets diagrammed on a diagonal line below the verb. So have a try. Look at these 5. Is it raining outside? Should I wear a coat? When do you eat? Did your grandmother call? She is singing? See if you can turn these interrogative sentences into declarative sentences and then diagram them appropriately. When you are ready to see the answers, please continue. Is it raining outside is diagrammed thusly. It is the subject, is raining is the verb, outside answers where. Make sure when you are diagramming the interrogative sentence, you capitalize the first letter of the first word of the interrogative sentence, not the answer to the question. Should I wear a coat is diagrammed I should wear coat. A describes coat. When do you eat? You is the subject, do eat is the verb. When, of course, is a when word, therefore it is an adverb that falls below the verb. Did your grandmother call? Grandmother is the subject, did call is the verb, your describes grandmother. She is singing is diagrammed exactly as though it were written like a declarative sentence. She is the subject, is singing is the complete verb. So how'd you do? If you're still having some trouble, review subjects and verbs, especially the complete form of the verbs. Remember to always draw your subject-verb divider line across the baseline. Every sentence has a subject and a verb, even questions. Okay, so can you answer what is an interrogative sentence? Do you know how to diagram an interrogative sentence? Can you answer how will diagramming interrogative sentences help me with my grammar? And were you able to diagram interrogative sentences correctly? If so, congratulations! You are ready to move on to the next lesson. If not, never fear. Review subjects, verbs, direct objects, and feel free to answer questions in the question area of the classroom, as well as feel free to send me a message if you have a question. Okay, thank you. Have a great rest of your lessons. Hello, welcome to sentence diagramming prepositional phrases as modifiers. This lesson's new parts of speech and new parts of a sentence are prepositions, nouns and pronouns used as the objects of the preposition, and the parts of a sentence are phrases. We'll be talking specifically about prepositional phrases. So what is a prepositional phrase? Well, a prepositional phrase is a phrase that can be used as an adjective, as an adverb, or as a nominative. For the purposes of this lesson, we're only going to be talking about prepositional phrases used as adjectives and adverbs to describe other nouns and the verb of a sentence. We'll talk about nominatives later on in the course. A prepositional phrase is made up of a preposition plus the object of the preposition and any words that modify the object of the preposition. It helps some students if they think about prepositions as anything you can say about an airplane in relation to a cloud or a squirrel in relation to a tree. And let's take a look at some examples of that. The squirrel lives in the tree. In the tree is the prepositional phrase. The squirrel climbs up the tree and across the branch. Up the tree and across the branch are the prepositional phrases. The airplane soars above the clouds. Above the clouds is the prepositional phrase. The airplane stops at the gate and the captain helps passengers down the ramp. At the gate and down the ramp are the prepositional phrases. One of my friends ice skates daily. Of my friends is the prepositional phrase. 3 of the brothers have graduated at the top of their class. Of the brothers is a prepositional phrase. At the top is a prepositional phrase, and of their class is a prepositional phrase as well. Now, diagramming prepositional phrases will be much easier if you have some idea of the common prepositions. Here are some of them. When I was in 7th grade, we were asked to memorize the prepositions, and I did so. I still have them memorized to this day, and it does make it much easier to pick the prepositional phrases out of a sentence. It's important to know how to pick the prepositional phrases out of a sentence because it helps us make sure that we have subject-verb agreement, so we're not mistaking the object of the preposition for the subject of the sentence. When we diagram prepositional phrases as modifiers, the first thing we have to do is take a careful look at the sentence and pick out that prepositional phrase, because like I just said, the object of the preposition cannot be the subject of the sentence. Once we pick out that prepositional phrase, which is the preposition of plus the object of the preposition, friends, plus the modifier my, once we pick that out of the sentence, we know that the word friends cannot be the subject of the sentence. And then we can diagram as we would any other sentence. We draw the baseline and the predicate line. Then we fill in the subject and the verb. In this instance, one is the subject, ice skates is the verb. It's a specific type of skating, so I'm using it as a compound verb. Then we'll add the modifiers. Daily describes when the friend ice skates. Of my friends describes one. It makes it more specific who it is you're talking about. Of is the preposition. The object of the preposition is friends, and my is the modifier. To take a more careful look at the form the prepositional phrase diagram takes, make sure you're distinguishing it from the indirect object form. In the indirect object form, you make a nice, neat elbow. For the prepositional phrase, the elbow crosses, more like a wheelbarrow or a high-heeled shoe. Okay? So the preposition goes on the diagonal line, the object of the preposition goes on the flat line, and if there are any modifiers, they don't go on the line that the preposition sits on, but they'll go on their own line. Okay, so when we diagram prepositional phrases as modifiers, again, the subject appears to the left, the verb appears to center. If there's a direct object, it will appear at the end. The modifying prepositional phrase might appear under the verb. It might appear under the subject, or it might appear under the direct object. It all depends on what word or words that prepositional phrase is modifying. For example, let's take these two sentences one at a time. My friend in the blue dress dances beautifully versus my friend dances beautifully in the blue dress. Although they seem as though they mean the same thing, when we really think about them, they're very different. My friend in the blue dress dances beautifully helps a person explain which friend they're talking about. It's not the friend in the pink dress that dances beautifully, it's the friend in the blue dress. There is more than one friend in this idea. We ask, which friend? The friend in the blue dress. It's the friend in the blue dress that dances beautifully. For the second sentence, my friend dances beautifully in the blue dress, there's only one friend. And we're answering when. Well, when does that friend dance beautifully? That friend dances beautifully when she's in the blue dress. Not so much when she's in her pink skirt. So, have a try of these. There are 10 here for you to give a try to. Here are some hints. If you have not, or if you are unfamiliar with prepositions, memorize some of the common prepositions. When necessary, use the compound construction we talked about with subjects and verbs and modifiers and objects. Figure out which question the phrase is answering in order to determine which word it's modifying, if it's being used as an adjective or if it's being used as an adverb. So go ahead and pause the video and continue when you're ready to see the answers. Squirrels live in trees. Squirrels is the subject. Live is the verb. In trees is the prepositional phrase that answers where do they live. Airplanes fly in the sky. Airplanes is the subject. Fly is the verb. In the sky is where the airplanes fly. My dogs eat from bowls. Dogs is the subject. Eat is the verb. My describes dogs. From bowls is the prepositional phrase that explains where they eat. The squirrel lives in the tree. Squirrel is the subject. Lives is the verb. The describes squirrel. In the tree is the prepositional phrase that describes where the squirrel lives. The squirrel climbs up the tree and across the branch. Now this one is a little more complicated. Squirrel is the subject. Climbs is the verb. The describes squirrel. But then we have two prepositional phrases combined with and. So we create our house or our rocket ship compound formation, and we create both prepositional phrases up the tree and across the branch. The airplane soars above the clouds. Airplane is the subject, soars is the verb, the describes airplane, above the clouds describes where the airplane flies. The airplane stops at the gate. Airplane is the subject, stops is the verb, the describes airplane, at the gate describes where the airplane stops. Captain Jim helps passengers with their luggage. Captain Jim, being the name of the captain, is the subject, helps is the verb, and in this instance, with their luggage is the prepositional phrase that describes the direct object, passengers. Captain Jim helps who? Passengers with their luggage. One of my socks fell on the floor. One is the subject, fell is the verb. Of my socks describes which one or what one. Fell on the floor. On the floor is the prepositional phrase that describes where it fell. 3 of the brothers have graduated at the top of their class. 3 is the subject, have graduated is the verb. Of the brothers explains which 3 we're talking about. At the top is where they graduated. Of their class describes top. What is of their class? The top. So you can have a prepositional phrase describing the object of another preposition. Let's take a look. Start with your subject, fill in your verb just as with any other sentence, and then decide where your prepositional phrases belong. So how did you do? If you're still having trouble, review additional information about prepositions. Remember to draw your subject-verb divider line. Every sentence has a subject and a verb. Be sure to draw indirect objects differently than prepositional phrases, and draw the subject-verb divider line differently than the direct object divider line. And look for elements of the sentence in order. Look for your subject, your verb, any modifying words for your subject and verb, your direct and indirect objects, and then add your modifying prepositional phrases. Don't get overwhelmed by the number of prepositional phrases. Just go back and decide which word or words it might be modifying. Take it one step at a time. So for review, can you answer what is a preposition? Can you list or name 10 common prepositions? Do you know how to diagram a prepositional phrase? Can you answer or think of a way that diagramming prepositional phrases could help you with your grammar? And do you know how and can you diagram prepositional phrases, including multiple prepositional phrases per sentence? If you can, you're ready to move on to the next lesson. Congratulations! If not, go back and take a look at prepositional phrases, memorize some of the common prepositions, and try again. And I will see you next time. Thank you for paying such close attention and being one of my students. Have a great rest of your lessons. Welcome to your sentence diagramming lesson for predicate adjectives and predicate nominatives. This lesson's new parts are parts that seem similar, parts you have seen before, but parts that now appear in new places in new ways. We're going to cover predicate nominatives, predicate adjectives, and linking verbs. None of the parts of a sentence are new. We'll just be using the parts of speech in new ways. A linking verb is a verb that expresses a state of being, and to be is the most common of the linking verbs. If a sentence makes sense after the verb is replaced with to be, it's most likely a linking verb as well. So in addition to the to be verbs is, are, was, were, has been, and etc., other linking verbs could include seems, tastes, or remains. For example, she seems sad. She is sad would mean the same. That tastes wonderful. That is wonderful would mean the same. She remains my friend. She is my friend would mean the same. A predicate nominative is a noun that follows the linking verb. You can think of a linking verb as an equal sign or a chain that links the subject to the noun in the predicate. For example, if you say she is my friend, she equals friend. Friend is a noun. He is a librarian. He equals librarian. Librarian is a noun. Susan seems to be a fantastic swimmer. Susan equals swimmer. Swimmer is a noun. A predicate adjective is an adjective that follows a linking verb, and in the same way as the predicate nominative, you can think of it as an equal sign. That verb, you can think of it as an equal sign between the subject and that predicate adjective. She is fantastic. She equals fantastic. Fantastic is an adjective. The pizza tastes spicy. The pizza equals spicy. Spicy is an adjective. Susan seems to be sad today. Susan equals sad. Sad is an adjective. When you diagram a predicate adjective or a predicate nominative, it looks a whole lot like a direct object. So for example, in the sentence, Doug is a race car driver, the first thing you want to do is determine that the sentence does contain a linking verb and that that linking verb is followed by a noun. Doug equals driver. So we start with the baseline. We fill in the subject. We draw the predicate line. We add our linking verb. We add the predicate nominative. Driver is a noun. We add the predicate nominative line. Then we add the modifiers. Notice that the predicate nominative or predicate adjective line is on a slant versus the direct object line, which would be perpendicular to the baseline. Our final diagram looks like this. Doug is a race car driver. So why don't you have a try? You can take a look at these and then pause the video and give these a try. Remember that all forms of the verb to be, sensory words like looks, sounds, feels, and other verbs that could be replaced by to be are often linking verbs, and they will either be followed by a noun or an adjective that better describes the subject of the sentence. The soup is cold. Soup is the subject, is the linking verb, cold is a predicate adjective, and the word the describes soup. Vera has been ill. Vera is the subject, has been is the verb, and ill is a predicate adjective. Shampoo is the subject, smells is the verb, wonderful is a predicate adjective, the and new both describe shampoo. The flower grew tall. Flower is the subject, grew is the linking verb, tall is the predicate adjective, the describes flower. Now remember that grew could be replaced with is. It tells us what it is. Therefore, it is a linking verb. He will be the new chauffeur. He is the subject. Will be is the verb. Chauffeur is the predicate nominative. The and new both describe chauffeur. So how did you do? If you're still having some trouble, review additional information about predicate adjectives and predicate nominatives. Remember that although the direct object and the predicate adjective or nominative are similar and they work in a similar manner in the sentence, you do need to distinguish between the direct object and the predicate nominative or adjective. You can do that by identifying that you have a linking verb in the sentence, and also you have to remember by drawing your direct object line perpendicular while you draw your predicate nominative or predicate adjective line at a diagonal. So, can you answer what is a predicate adjective? What is a predicate nominative? What is a linking verb? Can you think of a way that diagramming predicate adjectives and predicate nominatives really help improve grammar? And were you able to diagram predicate adjectives and predicate nominatives properly? If so, then you are ready to move on to the next lesson. Congratulations! Thank you for being one of my students, and I hope you were able to complete this lesson successfully. However, if you are not, please feel free to ask questions in the questions area of the classroom or send me a message. Thanks again. Welcome to your sentence diagramming lesson about verbals. This lesson's parts are, in the parts of speech, verbals, which are verbish nouns or adjectives, and there are three types: gerunds, infinitives, and participle. As for the parts of a sentence, we'll be talking about subjects and predicates, including direct objects and modifiers. What's a gerund? Well, a gerund is a word that looks like an ing verb, but it works like a noun. A gerund can be a subject, it can be a direct object, it can be an object of the preposition, and it could be a predicate nominative. a gerund can have its own direct object. An infinitive is the verb form that is preceded by the word to. The infinitive can function as a noun, as an adjective, or as an adverb. The infinitive can be a subject, it can be a direct object, it can be a modifier, it can be a predicate nominative, and it too can have its own direct object. A participle is a word that looks like an ed or ing verb, but it's a word that acts like an adjective. So when we ask which kitten, we could answer the meowing kitten. It ends in ing. It looks as though it could be a verb, but instead it's being used as an adjective to describe kitten. Which type of corn could be answered the creamed corn. It looks like it could be a verb, creamed, but instead it's being used as an adjective to describe which type of corn. So here are some examples. Look at the subject here. Stanley loves running. We can easily identify Stanley as a proper noun. Seth also loves to run. Seth is a proper noun. He likes to hear running water. He is a pronoun. Running is enjoyable. Running does not follow the pattern that we're used to seeing. Running ends in ing. We're used to seeing that as a verb, but in this instance it's being used as a noun. Running is enjoyable. And last but not least, Jess is running to the store. Jess is easily identified as a proper noun. Let's look at the verbs. Stanley loves running. Loves is an action verb. Seth also loves to run. Loves is the action verb. He likes to hear running water. Likes is the action verb. Running is enjoyable. Is the linking verb. Jess is running to the store. Is running is the continuous tense of the verb, is running. It's the way we're used to seeing the ing verb. As for direct objects, Stanley loves running. Running is the ing form we just saw used in two different ways. Seth also loves to run is the infinitive used as a direct object as well. Consider this modifier in the following sentence. He likes to hear running water. In this instance, it's being used as the participle describing the type of water. Let's use the sentence, Stanley loves running, as our example sentence for learning how to diagram a gerund. The first step, as always, is to draw the baseline. Then we draw the predicate line. We add our subject. We add our verb. We add our direct object and the direct object line, which is running. But in this instance, running is a gerund, a word that ends in ing. So we have to apply the gerund element to our diagram. The final diagram looks like this. To forgive is divine is the sentence we'll use to take a look at how to diagram an infinitive. To forgive is the subject, is the linking verb, divine is the predicate adjective. But we have to put to forgive on the special infinitive element. And the final diagram looks like this. She often eats mashed potatoes is the sentence we'll use as an example for how to diagram a participle. In this instance, it's a past participle. It ends in ed, but it's being used to describe potatoes. She is the subject, eats is the verb, potatoes is the direct object, often is an adverb that describes eats, mashed is being used as an adjective to describe potatoes. Notice the element for the participle. Although it makes an elbow, much like the indirect object, mashed is curved. It's rounded around the line. And the final diagram looks like this. Let's review those new elements. For a gerund, it looks like this, with the word running falling over the arch and then across. For infinitives, it looks much like a prepositional phrase element on legs. And for participles, Although it makes a nice diagonal elbow, the word itself is curved like a smile. So have a try. Take a look at these 10 examples and see what you can make of them. Pause the video when you're ready to see the answers. Continue the video. The first answer is the class is engaging. Class is the subject. Is a linking verb. Engaging is a predicate adjective. Although it is a participle, a present participle ending in ing, we diagram it just as we would any other predicate adjective. When I first recorded the audio for my slides, I did not mean for this to be a trick question. However, I did have to confirm that indeed, when diagramming a participle as a predicate adjective, you simply diagram it as usual right on the line. Running can damage your ankles. Running is a gerund being used as the subject of the sentence. Can damage is the verb, ankles is the direct object, and your describes ankles. Beth hates feeding the goats. Beth is the subject, hates is the verb, feeding the goats is the direct object, but feeding is a gerund with its own object, the goats, so it follows feeding right on that gerund element line. To err is human. To err is an infinitive that is also being used as the subject of the sentence. Is the linking verb. Human is the predicate nominative. Stephanie likes to fix cars. Stephanie is the subject. Likes is the verb. To fix cars is the direct object. To fix is an infinitive with its own object. So cars sits right on the line with to fix. In the sentence, dress to suit the occasion, understood you is the subject, dress is the verb, to suit the occasion is a verbal phrase. To suit is an infinitive. Occasion is the verbal complement for the infinitive to suit, and the describes occasion. His annoying pimple reappeared. Pimple is the subject, reappeared is the verb. His describes pimple, and annoying, the present participle, describes pimple. He gave his pimple an annoyed look in the mirror. He is the subject, gave is the verb, look is the direct object. His pimple is the indirect object. In the mirror is the prepositional phrase, and an annoyed describes the look that he gave his pimple. Take a look at the difference between diagramming the indirect object, the prepositional phrase, and the participle. Make sure you can tell them apart. Fixing cars is Stephanie's passion. Fixing cars is the gerund subject with its own object. Is the linking verb. Passion is the predicate nominative, and Stephanie's describes passion. Feeding the goats is messy and time-consuming. Feeding the goats is the gerund subject, is the linking verb, messy and time-consuming is the predicate adjective, the compound predicate adjective. Messy on the top line, consuming on the bottom line, time describing the type of consuming it is. So how'd you do? If you're still having trouble, review additional information about verbals or previous diagramming content as necessary. But don't be too hard on yourself. It is often difficult to distinguish between a verbal and a direct object that is any other normal direct object. The trick is to just get used to double checking all of your INGs and EDs in your sentence. They do work in a similar manner, so just make sure that you're checking those endings. Remember also to draw your subject-verb divider line every time because every sentence has a subject and a verb, so don't feel overwhelmed by the additional elements that we're covering. Start with the subject and fill in your verb and go from there. So, can you answer what is a verbal? Can you list and describe the 3 types of verbals? Do you know how to diagram each type of verbal? And can you think of a way that diagramming verbals can help you with your grammar? And were you able to diagram verbals correctly? If so, congratulations, are ready to move on to the next lesson. Thank you for being one of my students, and remember, if you have questions, I'm here to help. Welcome to Sentence Diagramming, learning about prepositional phrases used as nominals instead of as modifiers. This lesson's parts are the same as the parts for prepositional phrases as modifiers. We'll talk about prepositions and nouns and pronouns used as the objects of the preposition. And we're specifically focusing on the prepositional phrase. So remember, a prepositional phrase is a phrase that can be used as an adjective, as an adverb, or as a nominative, which sometimes is called a nominal. That just means a noun. It's a phrase that has the same function in the sentence as a plain old noun would have. Okay? And a phrase, unlike a clause, does not have a subject, a verb, and a complete thought. A prepositional phrase is the preposition plus the object of the preposition and any words that modify the object of the preposition. It helps some students to think of prepositions as anything you can say about an airplane in relation to a cloud or a squirrel in relation to a tree. So some examples of prepositional phrases as nominals or used as nouns are the following. During lunch is an inconvenient time. In this example, the prepositional phrase is being used as a noun, being used as the subject of the sentence. During lunch is being used as the time, as the thing itself. The best time of day is before dawn. In this example, the prepositional phrase is being used as a noun, the predicate nominative following the linking verb is. In the last example, which is, Renee gave under her bed a good scrub, the prepositional phrase is being used as a noun, the indirect object of the sentence. Some other grammarians might make a case that this phrase actually answers where she gave a good scrub, and they would also be correct diagramming this as an adverbial phrase under the verb. Either analysis, again, would be correct. For more explanation of how different diagrams can be correct, you can look in the introductory section of this course, and I have a PDF document called Diagramming Differences. In the end, however, a prepositional phrase is a prepositional phrase, and it will be diagrammed on the prepositional phrase element that I showed you in the first prepositional phrase lesson. That is very hard to say 3 times fast. So when we diagram a prepositional phrase as a nominal, again, we take a look at it as though it were any other sentence. We pick out any of the prepositional phrases in the sentence, and we know that the object of the preposition cannot be the subject of the sentence. In this example, the preposition is during, the object of the preposition is lunch, so together, during lunch is the prepositional phrase. We know that lunch cannot be the subject of the sentence. So we draw our baseline, we draw our predicate line, we fill in the subject and the verb. But wait, we know the verb is, the most common of the verbs, but we can't figure out what is, because we know lunch cannot be the subject of the sentence. Let's go back to the sentence. The phrase itself, the entire phrase, during lunch, could be replaced by a time, noon or 12 o'clock. Because it still makes sense when we replace it with that noun, we know it's being used as a noun. The entire phrase can be the subject of the sentence. Lunch is not the subject of the sentence. During lunch, the entire phrase is being used as the subject of the sentence. So we fill it in as the subject on the prepositional phrase element. During lunch, the verb is. We then create the predicate nominative line because we know that is a linking verb, therefore what follows will be a predicate adjective or a predicate nominative, and then we fill in the predicate nominative. We add the modifiers an and inconvenient, and the final diagram looks like this. During lunch is an inconvenient time. In this second example, the best time of day is before dawn. Of day is a prepositional phrase, as is before dawn. Well, of day definitely describes time. It's before dawn that is being used as the nominative or the nominal, following the linking verb is. Time is the subject, is the linking verb, before dawn is being used as the predicate nominative. The, best, and of day all describe time. In the third example, Renee gave under her bed a good scrub. Under her bed answers the question where. It also could be considered the indirect object of the sentence. Renee gave what? A scrub. Renee gave a scrub to whom or to what? Under her bed. Renee is the subject, gave is the verb, scrub is the direct object. A and good both describe scrub, and under her bed is the prepositional phrase that can either be used as a phrase describing where she gave or to what she gave. So in review, can you answer what is a preposition? Can you list 10 common prepositions? Do you know what is a nominal or a nominative? Do you know how to diagram a prepositional phrase as a nominal or nominative? Can you answer, will diagramming prepositional phrases really help me with my grammar? And can you diagram prepositional phrases, including multiple prepositional phrases per sentence? If you can, that's great. It's time for you to move on. If not, please go back and review the previous lesson on prepositional phrases, as well as feel free to please ask me questions in the question area if you have them, or send me a message. I'll be happy to answer. Thank you. Welcome to your sentence diagramming lesson about appositives and interjections. The parts of speech we'll be studying in this lesson are nouns, pronouns, and interjections. The parts of a sentence we'll be studying in this lesson are subjects, predicates, and noun phrases. An appositive is a noun or pronoun that renames another noun or pronoun. An appositive can be one word, or an appositive could be an entire phrase. Here are two examples. In the first sentence, my cat, Pumpkin, likes to sleep in the chair. Pumpkin renames my cat. In the second sentence, Blue, my aunt's cat, is much bigger than my cat. My aunt's cat is the appositive that renames Blue. Pumpkin renames my cat. My aunt's cat renames Blue. An interjection is a word that expresses an emotion. For example, yikes. Sorry. Yay. Great. Ouch. Wow. When you diagram an appositive, you are simply renaming the subject, so you use parentheses. Ms. Jenks, the teacher, smiled in class. Ms. Jenks is the subject. The teacher is the appositive. The verb is smiled, and the prepositional phrase in class describes where she smiled. Interjections express emotion and are not grammatically necessary in the sentence. So when we look at the sentence, yikes, that big cat looks mean, yikes goes on its own line above the proper sentence. The subject is cat, the verb is looks, The predicate adjective is mean. That and big both describe the cat. So, have a try. Try these 5 sentences. When you are ready to continue to see the answers, you can press play. The graduate is my brother, Michael. Graduate is the subject, is the linking verb, brother is the predicate nominative, Michael is the appositive that renames brother. The describes graduate and my describes brother. Yuck is an interjection. Then I is the subject, ate is the verb, lunch is the direct object, cubes renames lunch. The and free both describe lunch. Old baloney describes cubes. Yay! The prize, a trip to Spain, is ours. Yay is the interjection. Prize is the subject. Trip renames prize. Is the linking verb. Ours is the predicate nominative. The describes prize. A and to Spain describe the trip. Who knew is an interjection. A 5-time dressage champion, the bay is a pureblood quarter horse. Bay is the subject. Champion renames bay. A 5-time dressage describes the champion. The describes the bay. Is the linking verb. Quarter horse is the predicate nominative. A and pureblood describe the quarter horse. John's rabbit Fluffy has delivered 12 bunnies. Rabbit is the subject. Fluffy renames the subject. Has delivered is the verb. Bunnies is the direct object. John's describes rabbit and 12 describes bunnies. How did you do? If you're still having some trouble, review additional information about appositives and interjections online. Don't let an appositive throw you off. Remember the basics and pick out the subject and the verb before you complete the diagram. Look for attention-getting emotion words in order to identify the interjections. So, can you answer what is an appositive? Can you answer what is an interjection? Do you know how to diagram an appositive and an interjection? Have you been able to think of a way that diagramming appositives and interjections would help you with your grammar? If so, and if you can complete those 5 sentences without mistakes, then you are ready to move on to the next lesson. Yay! Did you see what I did there? I used an interjection. Okay, I'm such a grammar geek. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the classroom or to send me a message. Thank you. Congratulations! You've finally made it to the final lesson in diagramming sentences, and this is diagramming compound and complex sentences. This lesson's focus is on the parts of speech, nouns, pronouns, verbs, conjunctions, including subordinating conjunctions and coordinating conjunctions, and the parts of a sentence that we'll be talking about are clauses and phrases. A clause is a group of words that has a subject and a verb. A clause can be an independent clause, which is a clause that stands alone as a sentence. A dependent clause cannot stand alone as a sentence. For example, some independent clauses, which look exactly like sentences, include Peter hunts the wolf, the ice cream is melting, put it in the refrigerator, Jack climbed the beanstalk, he wishes he hadn't, Cinderella cleaned the oven, she dug the well. Some examples of dependent clauses, which sound a lot like sentence fragments, include while sleeping Beauty napped, because it is cold outside, as mother always says, as Chanticleer knows. Notice that the dependent clauses, again, sound like sentence fragments, whereas the independent clauses sound like complete sentences. On the other hand, a phrase does not have a subject, does not have a verb, or doesn't have either a subject or a verb. A phrase usually acts as a single part of speech in a sentence. We've already studied the prepositional phrase, the gerund phrase, the infinitive phrase, the participle phrase, and the noun phrase, the appositive. So some examples of those phrases: on the ferry, to eat cake, running near the lake, her favorite student, to run near the lake. Again, they sound like sentence fragments. There are 4 complexities of sentence structures. A simple sentence is made up of one independent clause. A compound sentence is made up of more than one independent clause. A complex sentence is made up of one independent and at least one dependent clause. And a compound complex sentence is made up of more than one independent clause and at least one dependent clause. To diagram a compound sentence, first we have to determine how many independent and how many dependent clauses the sentence contains. In this example, Cinderella cleaned the oven and she dug the well. There are 2 clauses, and we need to tackle each independent clause independently. Cinderella cleaned the oven is the first independent clause. It could stand alone as a sentence. She dug the well is the second independent clause. It could stand alone. Now notice that the independent clause follows the coordinating conjunction. To diagram the sentence, start with your baseline, as with any other sentence. Add your predicate and direct object lines. Fill in your subject, Cinderella. Fill in the verb, cleaned. Fill in the direct object, oven. Fill in any modifiers the first clause may contain. In this example, it's the. So the first clause is diagrammed like this. Now we have to diagram the second clause, she dug the well. First, we need to connect the 2 clauses with our element for coordinating conjunctions between clauses. It looks like a stair. We're going to put the word and right on the stair, and we're going to connect the 2 clauses at the verb. The first clause, Cinderella cleaned the oven, and the second clause, she dug the well. To diagram a complex sentence, we do the same as we did before. We have to determine how many independent and how many dependent clauses a sentence contains, and then we can tackle each independent clause independently or a dependent clause dependently. In this example, Cinderella was exhausted is the first clause. It could stand alone as a sentence. It is an independent clause. The second clause is she dug the well. It seems as though this could stand alone, but the 2 clauses are connected by the subordinating conjunction because. So that makes the second clause a dependent clause. The coordinating conjunctions we learned before are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, the fanboys words. If it is not one of those coordinating conjunctions, it is probably a subordinating conjunction, and the clause that follows will be dependent. So we diagram the first clause, Cinderella as the subject, was as the linking verb, exhausted as the predicate adjective. We connect because from verb to verb. She is the subject, dug is the verb, the well. We ask, why was she exhausted? The answer is because she dug the well. For our next example, let's look at an adjective clause that uses the word that. The example is, this is the horse that Jason rides. On our top clause line, we have this, the pronoun, as a subject, is as the linking verb, horse as the predicate nominative, modified by the word the. Then we have Jason rides that as our second clause. That is being used as a direct object, while also being the modifying phrase for which horse. We ask which horse, and we're told the horse that Jason rides. For coordinating conjunctions, we will link the sentences at the verb using the stare element when we have two independent clauses. That's for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. When we have pronouns that begin an adjective clause, we're going to use a straight dashed line and link the sentences between the word being modified and the pronoun. For example, this, that, these, those, who, or which. It could be straight up and down, or it could be on a diagonal, whatever we need to do to link the word to the word it modifies. When we use a subordinating conjunction, we're going to link them as we might an adverb with a diagonal dashed line from verb to verb. Some of the subordinating conjunctions we use most often include although, as, because, when, while, and where. So have a try. Pause and try diagramming the following sentences on your own. These are the last 10 exercises in the entire course, and the last 10 answers will follow. So pause when you are ready to see the answers. As the world turns, sailors sail. Sailors sail is the first clause, linked by the subordinating conjunction from verb to verb. The world turns. Kites fly is our first clause, connected with when, the subordinating conjunction when, between verb to verb, the wind blows. Kaylee and Beatrice, a compound subject, went, being the verb, to Rome, being a prepositional phrase. Then we link with the coordinating conjunction but to the verb did send, the subject being they, the direct object being postcard, modified by not, because they did not send to me a postcard. Did you clean the oven, or did you ask Cinderella to clean it? Needs to be rearranged as declarative so that it can be more easily diagrammed, which makes the subject you, the verb did clean, the direct object the oven, connected by the coordinating conjunction or to the subject you, the verb did ask, the direct object Cinderella, and the infinitive, actually, in this instance, to clean it. To clean it could also be diagrammed under the verb did ask. I have been gardening for a long time, so I know a tomato worm when I see one. I have been gardening. I is the subject. Have been gardening is the verb. For a long time is a prepositional phrase. Then we link that first to the second with the coordinating conjunction. So, I is the subject, know is the verb, Worm is the direct object. A and tomato both describe worm. Then we have to link the second to the third at the verb with the subordinating conjunction when. Subject I, verb C, direct object 1. Bob thanked the woman who taught him to diagram. This time, who taught him to diagram describes woman. Bob is the subject, thanked is the verb, woman is the direct object, modified by the. Then we connect woman to who taught him to diagram. The painting, which is his, is very beautiful. Again, which is his describes the painting, so we have to link which to the word painting. The painting is predicate nominative, predicate adjective, beautiful, described by very. Which is his, which as the subject, is as the linking verb, and his as the predicate nominative. Which is his describes painting. People who live in my town are very friendly. People is the subject, are is the linking verb, friendly is the predicate adjective, very describes friendly. Who live in my town describes the people. Who is the subject, live is the verb, in my town is the prepositional phrase that answers the question where. She was tired, so she went to bed and slept. She was tired is the first clause, she is the subject, was is the linking verb, tired is the predicate adjective, so is the coordinating conjunction between the clauses, she is the subject, went and slept is the compound verb for the second clause. Where did she go? She went to bed. To bed is a prepositional phrase. We can tell the difference between a prepositional phrase and an infinitive because an infinitive will be followed by verb, not a noun, like bed. Because I am tired, I am going to sleep too. I have put the independent clause first and linked it at the verb with the subordinating conjunction because, and I put the dependent clause second. However, I did still capitalize the word because to show that it is the first word of the original sentence. In the first clause, I is the subject, am going is the verb, to, T-O-O meaning also, describes am going, and to sleep is the infinitive. I in the second clause is the subject, am is the linking verb, tired is the predicate adjective. So how did you do? If you're still having some trouble, don't feel overwhelmed. It is a lot to comprehend when you start working with multi-clause and multi-phrase sentences. Just review some additional information about clauses, both dependent and independent. Familiarize yourself with common subordinate conjunctions such as although, as, because, when, while, and where. And think carefully about the function of any dependent clause in the sentence before linking clauses. Ask yourself if it's being used to describe another word or if it's being used to coordinate with another clause. We call it coordinate because it has the same amount of importance versus subordinate, which means it simply adds more information. So in review, can you answer what is a clause? Can you tell the difference between a clause and a phrase? How do you diagram a sentence that's made up of more than one clause? Can you answer, will diagramming sentences with multiple clauses help you with your grammar? And can you diagram compound and complex sentences? If you can, you're done. You have conquered one of the most difficult concepts in sentence diagramming. If not, never fear. Please feel free to post questions in the question area of the classroom or send me a message and I'll be happy to answer. Thank you so much. I do very much hope that you enjoyed the course and I hope to see you or hear you or have you sign up for any courses that I might be teaching in the future. Thank you again. Bye-bye. Welcome to your bonus lecture for diagramming sentences. This bonus lecture will introduce you to 3 additional sentence diagramming resources. The first is about the optional textbooks, Diagramming Sentences, a playful way to analyze everyday language, and additional exercises for diagramming sentences. Also, I have a blog called Gypsy Daughter Essays, and last but not least, there is a Facebook page for diagramming sentences at Diagramming Sentences. So the optional textbook goes a bit beyond the videos in the online Udemy course. It introduces more advanced sentences and advanced sentence structures. Each chapter contains 10 practice sentences and the answer keys for those 10 sentences. It's available on Amazon in both electronic and print editions, and for students who want even more learning, there is an additional text for parents, teachers, and tutors called Additional Exercises for Diagramming Sentences, and that's 10 more sentences per each chapter in the initial textbook. So potentially 20 sentences for each concept in all of the chapters. So in addition to the textbooks, I also have a blog called Gypsy Daughter Essays, and it's a blog about writing and grammar in general. I use it also for my college students. In order to access all the posts about sentence diagramming, you just need to choose the sentence diagramming label from the list of labels. There are all kinds of labels to choose from, but if you just want to see the sentence diagramming posts, just choose sentence diagramming from those labels to sort through the posts. And the Gypsy Daughter Essays URL is just gypsydaughteressays.blogspot.com. And on that blog, there's a post about diagramming sentences from Hamlet, there's a post in French from the novel Candide, there's a poem by Mina Loy, and there are posts about more specific parts of speech, parts of sentences, and even parts of an essay, like diagramming your thesis statement to make sure it's not a passive voice sentence. So there are all sorts of posts on grammar and sentence diagramming on the blog. Last but not least, you have a Facebook page. All new posts on the blog related to grammar and or sentence diagrams will be announced on the Diagramming Sentences Facebook page. I also announce sales of the book on that Facebook page as well. So those additional resources, one more time, you have some optional textbooks, diagramming sentences, a playful way to analyze everyday language, and additional exercises for diagramming sentences. You can look them up by the title of the book or just search for me as the author, Amy Lynn Hess. I also have the Gypsy Daughter Essays blog where I often post about grammar and diagramming, and there is a Facebook page where you can keep up with all of those things all at the same time, and Facebook assigned me the @diagramming sentences nomenclature, so that's all very exciting. And as a bonus lecture, I know it's not terribly exciting, but there are additional resources for you if you want to continue to learn how to diagram sentences. So thank you one more time for paying attention to all of this, and I appreciate you, and have an excellent experience on Udemy. Thank you.